Oi oi, it's your boy Slacky J, Fights Gone By podcast episode 215, coming at you ahead of Yas Island 2020. Fight Island, it's happening, fellas. Is it a private island in the Caribbean? No. Is the octagon on the beach? No. Have they already been there before? Yes. But, doesn't matter, we're doing Fight Island. And fuck knows it's keeping me in business, so I know not to look at gift, Arabic horse in the mouth. Camel? They use camels there, right? They use fleets of slave labour. Anyway, we're not going to do any news this week because, if we're honest, it's been a pretty depressing week. You had a bunch of people just coming out as fash, which was bizarre. You had the death of Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, Khabib's father. Really sad. And honestly, a very important figure in Dagestani MMA. And Dagestani MMA has always been a big part of Russian MMA. And Russian MMA is becoming a bigger part of global MMA. And, when he did die, everyone was putting up tributes and saying what a huge impact this man had had. And I thought, I don't really want to jump in on that because I'm not entirely clear on all of his influence. I know I'm familiar with Khabib Nurmagomedov, the Nurmagomedov who was fighting my boy Mansour Barnui, Islam Makhachev, obviously, and a few other guys from particularly Abdulmanap's camp in Dagestan. But I thought I'd rather look into it than just sort of pretend I know what I'm talking about here. So that's something that I'm going to be working on in the coming weeks, just looking into the impact of Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, which I'm sure is big, but I didn't want to chime in and pretend I knew exactly what it was. Badass picture of him when he was younger went up on Reddit the other day. He looks like Khabib in a sort of a scarier way. Like, Khabib has slightly kinder features than this dude, which should tell you how mean he looked. But there's terrific footage of Abdulmanap doing seminars on YouTube, and some of them are captioned, which is fantastic. It might have been Sonny Brown, actually, got some translated for a study he was doing. But yeah, Abdulmanap seems like a very crafty dude. Because he was a wrestler / Sambo guy, but he had some really interesting thoughts on how to do that in MMA specifically, when strikes are such a problem for so many wrestlers and grapplers. And then, of course, no escaping COVID. Well, having said, Khabib's father did die of COVID, but no escaping COVID in the news because obviously so many of the camps are in Florida. Florida is an absolute shit show at all times, but especially now. And basically everyone who trains at is it Hard Knocks 365, Hoof's place, and ATT? All of these guys still training and have COVID. So Mike Brown, who's been an enormously influential guy over, he had a good run as a fighter. We always talk about this, but he really has done amazingly as a coach at American Top Team, and he can't be in Jorge Masvidal's corner because he's got COVID or tested positive for COVID, and the entire reason this fight is happening now, in fact, we haven't spoken since this fight was made, but the reason this fight's happening, Masvidal versus Usman, is because Gilbert Burns was going to fight, and then it turned out he had COVID as well. So just ongoing struggles, fighting in the time of cholera, and but they've managed to put together a pretty great card this weekend. So that's what we're going to talk about. We'll try and make it interesting because we got some Johnny-come-latelys in from the Joe Rogan podcast yesterday, I imagine. My boy Josh Barnett was on there and gave me a shout out, which I always appreciate. It gets like I'm sort of used to it because we had TJ Dillashaw and a few others go on there and mention me. But then sometimes I just remember, oh, hang on, this is like the most popular podcast in the world. That's a bit weird. If you're new here, this is what we do. We prattle about stuff, but you're probably going to be more interested in the Filthy Casuals Guide videos. Go watch those if you don't like a dude sipping stewing tea and laughing about good and bad fights. So let's go, UFC Yas Island. Yas Queen. That's a pretty dated reference now. I think that would get me okay boomered. I think we'll go top to bottom because I don't want to bury the lead here. So, top fight, obviously, Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal. Now, this is a fight that has been interesting for a while. I think we're in a weird position because there are a lot of people who think Jorge Masvidal is the greatest fighter on earth based on knocking out Ben Askren and beating Nate Diaz. And then there's a lot of people who think that Jorge Masvidal is an overrated bum because he's got a 35-13 record. And the truth is neither. Yes, beating Ben Askren and Nate Diaz shouldn't count for much. Ben Askren wouldn't have a win in the UFC if Herb Dean didn't mistake a head squeeze for a bulldog choke. And, the fight with Maia immediately afterwards proved that he really doesn't have an idea what he's doing aside from holding guys down, and especially not very good guys on not the regional scene, but, one before one was one. And Nate Diaz is obviously not a top tier guy anymore. And even if he is, he's a top tier guy with such obvious shortcomings that not only, Masvidal did stuff that everyone else who's beaten Diaz has done. He just doesn't change from fight to fight, Nate. Whereas Masvidal has lost a lot of fights, but he does change. He has improved himself. And certainly in the last three, at least, you can see a more active fighter. One of the things that always annoyed me about Masvidal was that he was very good defensively and had a lovely jab, and he'd sit back behind it and not do enough to win, and he'd sort of have like the Bobby Green thing, where the opponent would throw some punches, you'd slip them or shoulder roll them or whatever, and then you'd mean mug about how it didn't hurt you, instead of actually taking advantage of the moment and countering and scoring points and getting ahead on the cards and doing damage. And if there's one thing you can say about Masvidal in his last three is that he's done some damage. The one that was impressive was the Till fight, because Till was lighting him up. I know it's fashionable to pretend that Till, was a hype train that just, flew off the tracks after back-to-back losses to Woodley and Masvidal, but he is very, very fast and very, very powerful. And, you could see Jorge Masvidal was having a horrible time. He was basically having to take punches on the face and then swing back because he knew that Till's chin would be up once he'd done hitting him in the face. I've unprivated the Filthy Casuals guide to Jorge Masvidal, which I kept up because I thought I might need it at some point. If you want to go watch that, go watch that. It is a fantastic overview. Well, I'm saying it's fantastic as mine, but it's a really all you need to know about Masvidal himself and his style. Where this gets interesting is that in Usman versus Masvidal, you've sort of got that ATT versus cage wrestler style matchup again. Dustin Poirier versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. Very different fighters, obviously. There's 4 different people here, and we're not just talking about a repeat of the previous one, but Dustin Poirier, big banger, great on the feet, stops a decent takedown, but a lot of his takedown defense is his ability to get back up and wall walk, which is an American top team trait. I was saying this last week. They teach guys to do that really well. Joanna, Kyoji Horiguchi, people who just were okay, and then they went to American top team and they became really top tier fighters because they didn't have to worry about getting taken down anymore, for the most part. Just to be clear, for people who are new from the Joe Rogan podcast, I mean Kyoji Horiguchi, who is a terrific fighter. You should watch him. Everything after the Demetrius Johnson fight. Watch the Demetrius Johnson fight and things before that to see how bad he was at wall walking. And then he went to American top team and became an awesome wall walker. But yes, you got that, Jorge Masvidal does a lot of wall walking, does the like trinity of things while trying to get up. He looks for the switch, he looks for the guillotine, and he looks to stand up. Whenever you take him down near the fence or take him down out in the open, it's always building up along the fence, looking for those same 3 things. Where that gets messy is that there are now guys like Usman and Khabib who do better holding you down along the fence, or honestly, they do better if they take you down and then you scoot to the fence and use the fence to stand up. Because here's the thing, if you want to stand up, the fence is a much more reliable way to do it. You will, guys, even guys that Khabib is much better than, will eventually get up along the fence. Problem is, they can't get away and he takes them down again. So it was a really reliable way to get up again. Much more reliable than trying to work off your back. But if you can't get away once you stand up, you're just sitting there waiting to be taken down again. And that, in a nutshell, is every Usman and Khabib fight, and some of Islam Makhachev's fights. And there's a few guys out there now doing that. And, there's all the stuff where, because when you want to wall walk up, a lot of guys will scoot themselves back on their butt to sit on the fence. And, that's when Khabib sits on the ankles. You got guys like Khabib, Dan Ige, who's that hillbilly who thinks that COVID is a Democrat plot to take guns? Bryce Mitchell. So many of these guys now doing that, and Dustin Poirier against Dan Hooker, doing that, sitting on the leg, or sitting on both legs, or sitting on one leg, and reaching behind the opponent, catching the far wrist, and folding them down on it, or trying to sneak around behind their back. It's a really powerful set of positions. I'm guaranteeing you it's winning the slacky for Technique of the Year when we do that next. Usman doesn't do that as much, but what he does do is really just keep dragging you down every time you stand up along the fence. Never lets you off. If you watch him like against Leon Edwards has gotten better since then, but Leon Edwards has always been good in the clinch and pretty good at standing up along the fence, and good at breaking away from people. But where a lot of the time it used to be once you're up, the other guy was a bit deflated and you'd break his hands or get an underhook and circle out. That doesn't happen against Usman. You get up and then you try and circle off and it doesn't work. And then he goes, okay, well now I'm going to hit my outside trip and sit you down again and keep throwing body shots that don't really do anything, but it is activity, He's a very tricky customer. And it is, again, it just tells you how much great conditioning means in this sport, because he can do it for 5 rounds. Now, in his last performance where he fought like that, because the Covington fight was just like the two of them agreed to a tough man contest, so we're not really counting that. But the last fight where he fought like himself was against Tyron Woodley, and he looked really, really good because a lot of what Tyron Woodley does is stand along the fence and not do enough. And then, I was getting pissed off with this in his last one because he goes back to his corner and Dean Thomas, without fail, between rounds will go, we need combinations and ask for activity and combinations when Tyron Woodley has never shown himself capable of doing it. I mean, people are always talking about corners being great for knowing their fighters, but you're still asking Tyron Woodley for stuff that he won't do. No disrespect to Dean Thomas because he's a great corner, but it's just makes me, it's just confusing. Does he do that in training when Dean Thomas asks him, I wonder? Is he just does he just change under the ring lights? But anyway, so yeah, I'm saying that Usman was sort of artificially made to look even more dominating than he is because he didn't have to cut the cage on Woodley. Woodley put himself on the fence, and Woodley doesn't offer a lot of threats from his back or from anywhere that isn't just sort of when he's bursting off the fence with 1 or 2 punches around. Now, Masvidal's footwork looked pretty good against Nate Diaz, but then Nate Diaz's footwork is abysmal. He turns like a barge, so guys just circle around him. I wrote this in my tactical guide to Holloway versus Volkanovski 2 this week, but anyone who circles on the Diaz brothers is immediately called a coward and a runner, but also, crucially, wins. So jabbing and circling is something that Masvidal is capable of. It's something that not a lot of fighters are, but he is. So that could be interesting. His ability to stay off the fence, because a lot of the time when Usman wants to get on the fence against people who don't want to be on the fence, he'll go southpaw, shoot a left straight, pick up a single leg, and then use the single leg to run them to the fence. What is it they call it in Muay Thai, ploughing the field or something like that? Or sweeping the floor, where you pick up the leg and you just run towards the ropes. I guess for me the interesting part of this fight is that Jorge Masvidal is smart enough to know to stay off the fence and capable of staying off the fence, but when the takedown attempt happens, does he then go to the fence? Because that's sort of the weird way that his game's set up. A lot of his takedown defense relies on the fence, but his number one goal here should be staying off the fence. I mean, ultimately, it's all pointless if he runs up and knees the dude in the face anyway. But I think another interesting thing about this is that Masvidal, really good body kicker, very underrated. You don't see guys talking about it because they're obsessed with him being knockout Jesus or whatever. But since way back when, he has been landing body kicks consistently in MMA because he's very comfortable having his leg caught, fighting off the single, hopping to the fence, using the fence to prop himself up. And if he can get the body kicks going against Usman, I think he could give Usman a really, really hard time. Because Usman, fights quite high hands, doesn't defend his body an awful lot. I don't know if he'd know what to do aside from running in, picking up the leg or running into the clinch. If Masvidal can hinder the takedowns enough and score body kicks, I think this is a very long night for Usman. But have, ATT really come up with anything to deal with being held down or not being held down, but being stalled out while trying to get up along the fence? Because I keep coming back to it, but that Dustin versus Khabib fight was just Khabib would take Dustin down, or Dustin would grab the guillotine and sit down, and then he'd go, okay, well now I want to get up again. He'd scoot his butt to the fence, and then Khabib would sit on his ankles and beat the shit out of him. And then when he got up, he'd just get taken down again. So it'd be very interesting to learn something from this fight. Usman is not, last fight aside, Usman is not always a tremendously entertaining fighter, But Masvidal hasn't always been a tremendously entertaining fighter to most fans. I mean, going back and watching his fights with like Larkin, you're going, man, this is a really technically sharp fight. They're both just not really doing enough, you know? And he's had a lot of fights like that. Or the James Krause one, another one. I mean, that was actually quite a high-paced bout for an early Masvidal bout. But, yeah, those just sort of like fell under the radar. People didn't give a shit about those because no one was getting knocked out. So go watch the Filthy Casuals Guide to Jorge Masvidal. It's on the channel. You can find it. It's on the Filthy Casuals Guide playlist, which I've now put on the front page of the channel. And, well, actually, I'm going to get into this in a second, but remember that this is a really weird way to have fights. You know, no one has prepared under the ideal circumstances. Coming in last minute, does it give you an edge? Does it give the other guy edge? Who fucking knows? We're through the looking glass now on Fight Island. No one has been able to train like they normally do or want to. The most important thing, though, is that fighter pay has been solved. No one will talk about that for the next few months, unless John Jones can keep hammering on about it. Yeah, that was the reaction of everyone online. It was like, hey, Jorge's getting paid. And you're like, I bet he's getting paid about 50 grand more. And we're not getting a fighters union. These people, fuck's sake. Anyway, let's look at some of these other fights. Because honestly, that main event for me, I feel like a lot of people think it's the biggest fight in the sport right now. There's stuff on this card that excites me more than that. Volkanovski versus Holloway is an odd one. And I'm going to plug the big piece I did for the Patreon boys. If you're not a Patreon boy, you can go read the first third of it on thefightprimer.com. I'll link it in the description on YouTube. It is a big old piece. I audio narrated? I just narrated it because I do that with all my Patreon articles. But I included the part that explains how Volkanovski was so effective in the first fight at stopping Max from doing what Max does. The second and third part are about how Max had some success in that fight, but didn't really capitalize on it. And the third part is hypothetical game plans for how you would improve Max's performance and how you would deal with that if you were Volkanovski. But as I said at the end of that article, if you're Volkanovski and Max doesn't do anything different, which, you know, the footage of Max watching the fight and talking about the first fight makes me think that he's not going to change anything and he is delusional. But you know, the low kick is the secret here. But basically, everything Holloway does leads off the jab. To jab, you have to put your foot into range. You can't... I mean, I always point out Calvin Kattar tried this, but he tried to make up a way of boxing without putting his foot in because Renato Moicano kept kicking his leg every time he tried to step in and jab. And he didn't manage anything. He could not invent a new style of boxing on the fly. It is impossible to box without putting your foot down. And that is where Volkanovski, Hooker, Adesanya, everyone from City Kickboxing has been doing so well. Volkanovski also did a terrific job of keeping tight during the kick, and as Holloway tried to make him pay, Holloway would get his knee buckled in by a calf kick or a regular low kick, and then he'd try and come back, which is what he did against Aldo. He tried to come back with the right hand every time that Aldo threw the low kick. Fortunately, Aldo threw 2 low kicks across both fights. But, you know, it's a sound way to deal with it. You try and make the opponent pay, but if you can't make them pay and you can't convince them that they're going to pay, they'll just keep kicking. So you've got to start dealing with that, as you know, rather than counting on them being scared of kicking. Volkanovski would kick, Holloway would have his knee buckled across himself, so he'd be slow coming back for a start. But Volkanovski would get his foot back to the floor and throw a cross counter across the top or a counter left hook, and meet Holloway basically punch for punch, even when Holloway was able to try and get more punches going. He was able to cut Holloway's combinations off at the first punch by low kicking, and if Holloway was allowed to work longer, he'd out-hustle him and out-punch him. You know, in this fight, they threw about an even number of strikes, both over 300, and Volkanovski outlanded Max Holloway, which is incredibly impressive when you consider that Max Holloway's thing is I land some punches this round, I land some more punches next round, and then by round 5, it's 100 punches to nothing. Holloway had some success shutting down the way that Volkanovski was shutting him down by going southpaw, but he really didn't have a lot of ideas from there. It was just a low-line side kick and then trying to hop down the outside off a fake low-line side kick to throw the left straight. And then he just sort of ran out of ideas. Volkanovski was doing a great job with a shifting right hook. Again, read the article, but my basic gist was to get in on someone who's going to low kick every time you jab or step in, you got to kick your way in. That's the way it's got to be done. Come in behind a push kick, come in behind a round kick. Dustin Poirier against Dan Hooker, perfect example. Round kicks him in the body or the arm, falls in and starts punching. Now, you don't think of Dustin Poirier as an amazing kicker. He's a good kicker, but you don't think of him as an amazing kicker. But he used his kicks to get in, because when you're kicking the guy, you're coming in from a greater distance. You're not having to plant your foot down to do it in range, and you can knock him off balance if he tries to kick you at the same time. And I was saying there's a lot of ways he could do this. He could front snap kick and step in with punches like Tony Ferguson does, like Sean O'Malley did against Wineland the other week, like Shinzo Machida used to. It's a good way to enter. You go southpaw, you throw the left, front snap kick, step in, and then you're jabbing with your left hand, and you can continue off that boxing. Or he could go from either stance. He could just go big push kick to knock Volkanovski to the fence, step in with punches. Volkanovski was very good at staying disciplined when he was against the fence. He'd circle off a lot. Round 4 and 5 really slows down. Can't get off the fence in time. Combinations, body work starts going in from Holloway. And crucially, the kicks were much slower. The counter kick works as a weapon when Volkanovski's quick enough to kick and get back in position to deal with counters. It doesn't work when he slows down. So even if Holloway only wants to kick for 2 or 3 rounds, he can hopefully tire Volkanovski out a bit and then start stepping in and using his more traditional boxing, the stuff that he's always used. Lots of kicking also stops head movement, which is something Volkanovski was showing a lot of. I want to see intercepting knees and intercepting elbows, because Volkanovski was so often coming forward square on with big straight line attacks. The shifting right hook is an especially obvious example. But, the thing that surprised me most in the first fight was that Volkanovski has been very strong against the cage, very strong wrestler. Most of his fights in the UFC, he was wrestling. And then the Aldo and Mendes fights, he's a kickboxer suddenly, and then he's out kickboxing Max Holloway. But I thought it was very impressive that Holloway wasn't at any sort of strength disadvantage in the clinch, it didn't look like. Every time Volkanovski got a hold of him, he'd make some space and immediately start circling off. And I think that's really encouraging. If you were worried about kicking for getting caught in like a grappling exchange or a wrestling exchange, don't be. Just kick lots. At least you're going out there and trying to do something that will make Volkanovski's life harder. Of course, for Volkanovski, if he starts kicking, you do have to start stepping into the clinch, trying to run the clock a bit. If you can get a takedown, great. But if not, hold him against the fence. Make him think that every kick is going to result in being smothered for half a minute. But I think intercepting knees are a huge idea for Holloway. He threw 1 in the first fight, and it very clearly winded Volkanovski. He did nothing for 15 seconds afterwards, which is a real tell. When you're watching guys who are smart and tough, you know by how they fight after it. You don't know by their grimace. But anyway, like I said, I wrote 4,000 words on that. Go read it. It's a big old article. I put an audio narration in, so you have no excuse if you don't like words. Lots of diagrams and shit like that. The tactical guide to Volkanovski versus Holloway 2. Go read it. Now, the third title fight's a bit of a weird one. You've got Petr Yan versus Jose Aldo. It's quite fashionable, even in Aldo-loving circles, to just give Aldo no chance against anyone at the moment, but this is an odd one, because Aldo lost his last one against Marlon Moraes, even though a lot of us thought he did enough to win it, and the judges gave it to the wrong person, but then he was booked to fight Henry Cejudo, and everyone gave him no chance in that one. And I thought that's a really good fight for Jose Aldo, because he's dealing with a strong wrestler, and you have the best takedown defense of anyone ever. And he's not a great boxer, Henry Cejudo. He's a decent karate boxer, but he's not he had a lot of trouble with Marlon Moraes, who wasn't quick enough to outspeed Jose Aldo. And Cejudo's had a lot of trouble with low kicks, and Jose Aldo has the distant memory of low kicks, but just doesn't seem to want to throw him. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting fight for Aldo. I didn't give him no chance at all there. But Petr Yan is a tough ask. Petr Yan has been an absolute monster in his UFC run. I'll be honest, I was surprised how long Uriah Faber lasted against him. But just relentless pressure. Actually, I'm not going to say relentless pressure. I'm going to say subtle pressure. Because the first round of a Yan fight, I sometimes catch myself going, this is a really boring fight. And then by round 2, I'm going, this is the best fight ever. Because he very slowly creeps up on you. And then suddenly he's just non-stop pressure, grinding you down, and it's worked really, really well. Compare him to in the next fight the fight before this you got Jessica Andrade, and that's just wild running at the person over and over again. Yan is actually sets himself up, makes you feel uncomfortable. Just even when he's not throwing punches, he's trying to make life difficult for you with cutting off the cage, moving you towards the fence. Really nice hands. He does some cool little shifting strikes, but good in just like from his stance with combinations too. Good counter puncher. Good kicker. He's known as this boxer, but he does really good. He's incorporated kicking really well into his game. And of course, the clinch stuff is fabulous too. If you watch some of the clips of him sparring at, is it Tiger Muay Thai he's out of? But if you watch some of the clips of him sparring, he is nasty. He's very creative and just slapping the shit out of these guys who are obviously not in the same league as him. I think, do you know what? I think this could be a really fun one. I think Aldo, yes, we're at the point where he's past his best, but he's a really slick boxer for MMA. And Petr Yan is also a very slick boxer for MMA. Jose Aldo, decent in the clinch, but really more in the defensive takedown area. Petr Yan actually going to use, we overused the phrase the tie clinch. Oh my God, I meant to say that Holloway should be hunting with the double collar tie, but I said that in the article. We used the tie clinch to refer to the double collar tie, which, almost no one ever gets in Muay Thai because the other guys are going to stop you doing it. But tie clinch in like the general overview sense, that's what Matt Brown does. That's what Petr Yan does. The trips and the knees, and the trips to set up the knees, and the knees to set up the trips, and kicking on the break and shit like that. That's something that Petr Yan does that Jose Aldo doesn't really do. And one of the interesting things in this one is that Max Holloway did a really good job whenever Aldo ducked into a clinch on him or he ducked into a clinch on Aldo. He would get his head in front of Aldo's, get his hips back, and then he'd hit him with a left hook or an elbow on the break. And he'd always catch Aldo. Because as great as Aldo's hips are, he's often, his hands are down addressing the threat of the takedown. I think this is real interesting because Aldo's got good footwork, but the thing about Aldo is that he does like to be left alone. If you run in on straight lines, like Frankie Edgar did across 2 fights, he's going to pivot out and make you look silly. But if Petr Yan keeps up that constant pressure, that's what killed Aldo in both Holloway fights. Holloway stayed on him. Aldo can slip a punch on a moment's notice and come back with 3 punches that would take your head off. But he does that every time. Like every time Max Holloway showed him a feint with the shoulder, which took no effort at all, Aldo would slip and try and start swinging back a punch that almost gave him a hernia. And that's so tiring. And I think that's what Petr Yan it might bring out here, like the worst habits of Aldo, just by keeping him going backwards and keeping him working. That being said, Petr Yan is a lot more there to be hit than Holloway was. He's a lot more present. He's not going to be standing back and feinting jabs and things like that. Yeah, I think it's interesting. People are treating this as like not the real title fight on the card, but obviously the bantamweight division, there's some dumb shit going on there. But Petr Yan has got to be in real title contention. Jose Aldo, even with the last loss, if he beats Petr Yan here, I'm happy being like, okay, cool, bantamweight title, have it. You just beat one of the scariest guys in bantamweight who hasn't lost in the UFC. Let's have a quick rundown of the rest of the card then. Paige Van Zandt versus Amanda Ribas is on there. You got lots of people mad at Paige Van Zandt for saying that she could earn more money elsewhere. She probably could. I agree with people complaining about fighter pay unless they're internet thoughts, and then I'm angry. But she's fighting Amanda Ribas. Ribas is good fun. Paige Van Zandt, for all the hate she gets, she doesn't really have boring fights. She has fun fights. That'll be a decent scrap and easy on the eye because, that's what they do when they book a Paige Van Zandt fight. They go like, let's find her another attractive chick and make them fight each other. I just missed Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas. I think the first fight, everyone knows Rose Namajunas was timing her beautifully, sidestepping her lovely, jabbing her up, countering her with good right hands when she was lunging in. Jessica Andrade is just tough. She could be awesome if she had a half-decent kickboxing coach or boxing coach, but she doesn't, and her main sparring partner is Priscilla Cachoeira. So that's why she's never going to get better. But on toughness and power alone, she can often get through. Add an inside low kick, which she's shown like twice ever. Add that, she becomes a monster. But she doesn't use it, so the opponent can just keep circling around to her left, and she's got these little T-Rex arms that she's swinging straight at the opponent and still can't reach. But she did pick her up with the high crotch and dumped her on her head. Obviously, that's the big thing. People are like, that's a fluke. She did it twice, or tried it like 3 times and managed it once. Rose ended up on her head by not letting go of it. People were like, ban the slam because my fave got slammed. But, I think this will be interesting. Obviously, Namajunas has the technical edge on the feet. She was using the Kimura trap to try and turn wrestling exchanges into grappling ones, which we like. Corey Sandhagen does that. But it'd be very interesting to see her on the bottom against Jessica Andrade. It would also be very interesting to see how she lasts over the distance, because Andrade is, she'll take a beating for 5 rounds and still be there in the 5th. whereas Namajunas was using a lot of energy to get out of the way, to throw back stinging counters. I mean, I love watching Rose Namajunas fight. I think she's one of the, you got your Valentina Shevchenko's, your Joanna Jaceks and so on, who are good strikers, but I think Rose Namajunas is really some of the best striking for MMA you will see in the women's divisions, and maybe in any division, but, I just question, that she's, I don't want to get into too much about, her as a person, but that she's quite a peculiar personality, and that she has some psychological stuff with defeats and so on like that. She was talking about, maybe not fighting again. If you give her the same opponent and then she loses again, are you just, saying we don't want Rose Namajunas back? Maybe give her a different match before doing this rematch, but they were really set on this rematch. Anyway, both I like both those girls. One of them because they're super classy technician, and one of them because they're not. Elsewhere on this card, you got some really hot shit, actually. Firstly, Leonardo Santos sighting. What the fuck? If you don't know who Leonardo Santos is, and there's no reason you would because he never fights, he's about the most one of the most promising guys in the UFC's stiffest division. He was a top flight, world class, cream of the crop grappler. If you watch him armbar GSP at the ADCC 2009, effortlessly. He used to be legendary for his butterfly guard. He's a very lanky guy, but had a great butterfly guard, and he'd almost stand on his head and make the opponent do a cartwheel to do it. But then he came to MMA. He's been around a long time. In his first fight, he fought Takanori Gomi in Shuto in 2002. Absolute joke matchmaking. So then he takes 4 years off and comes back again. And then he ran up his record over a long, long time. But for our purposes, he turned up in the UFC in 2013. He has never lost a fight in the UFC. He's knocked out people like Stevie Ray and Kevin Lee. Yeah, Kevin Lee. He choked out Anthony Rocco Martin. I know what you're saying. Who the fuck is this guy? And it's because he never fights. He's always cancelling bouts. From 2016 to 2019, he didn't fight. He fought in June 2019, knocked out Stevie Ray. Hasn't fought since. So that's why I'm saying Leonardo Santos sighting, because you're gonna watch him, you're probably gonna be impressed, and then you're not gonna see him for 2 or 3 years again. You got Makwan Amakani versus Danny Hendry. Fun one there. I mean, obviously Amakani's last fight was just kind of embarrassing from a professional fighter point of view. He's a great technician. He's a strong guy, powerful guy. Good hitter. He was hitting Shane Burgos with some stingers. But if you don't turn up in shape to do it for 3 rounds, this isn't a 5-round fight. If you don't turn up in shape to do it for 3 rounds in the lightweight division, it's not heavyweight. You can't just turn up and do that and count on the other guy being as gassed. Burgos slapped the shit out of him because Burgos was still there in the second half of round 2 and round 3. So hopefully they got some treadmills over in, is he Straight Blast Gym Island? Then you got Zaleski versus Muslim Salikov. That is an awesome fight. Zaleski, weird striker, great grappler. Muslim Salikov, awesome. The king of Sanshao, the king of Kung Fu, whatever. He was an amazing Sanshao competitor. I watched his early MMA run, and it seemed like he was doing nothing. And then suddenly he's in the UFC and he's doing awesome things. He will, if you get a chance in this fight, but Zaleski's weird because sometimes he fights absolute shit, against the Leech. And then sometimes he comes out and just bangs people out there. But Salikov, if you've never seen him fight, he'll spring in with the jab, not to hit the dude, but just to annoy the dude, in their personal space, and immediately spring back. And as the opponent comes back, he'll return with a low kick, or he'll spin and do a back kick, and it works awesome. If you all his UFC fights, he's done that in. And then the last real interesting fight on the card, I think. Hold on. Yes, the last really interesting fight on the card, because I'm not going to pretend that Marcin Tybura is good. I had to do that once when he was a top 15 heavyweight. Never doing that again. But Volkan Ozdemir versus Jiri Prochaska. Jiri has never been very impressive technically. He's never been a guy who just gets in there and blows people away, but he has been building up these wins over the best of the rest. There's not a lot of light heavyweights out there. He's been beating them outside the UFC. It was go to the UFC or Bellator. We need to find out. He signed with the UFC, and they're not giving him an easy fight. They're giving him Volkan Ozdemir, who is one of the best rounded light heavyweights in the world. He's a light heavyweight who can actually do everything and well, and for 3 rounds. So real hard ask for him there. I'm a big fan of Jiri. I think he's got a lot to chew on here. If he does, fucking awesome. But Volkan Ozdemir, I gave him my most improved fighter of the year last year over Justin Gaethje because of some of the stuff I'd seen from him. That's going to make some people so mad, but I'll remind you that Justin Gaethje fought like 3 minutes in the previous year. This was before the Tony Ferguson fight. Right, I was going to do some questions, but we've gone quite long today, so we'll cut it off there, and I'll be back Monday with whatever's happened on these fights. Can't fucking wait. Go and watch some Leonardo Santos highlights. Go watch the Filthy Casuals Guide to Jorge Masvidal. If you want to become a Patreon boy, support the podcast, read the tactical guide to Volkanovski versus Holloway. Just last week we did a study of Elias Enahachi, whose name I'm still terrible at saying, but fantastic kickboxer over in one. We do new stuff every week, and I try to narrate it every time, and it's always good fun. So join the Patreon. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonbypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, recommended out of Josh Barnett's Big Bushy Beard Bless.